The dust from the wagon wheels had barely settled when Lillian Parker collapsed beside her broken-down vehicle, the gnawing pain of 3 days without food making her vision blur at the edges. The vast, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona Territory stretched around her like a death sentence, the summer of 1878 proving to be one of the most merciless in memory. Lillian ran her fingers through her matted auburn hair, once lustrous and carefully pinned, now falling loose around her dirt-streaked face. The journey from Boston to the frontier town of Val Verde had been ambitious, perhaps foolish. Her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and a letter from an old acquaintance suggesting opportunities out west for a woman with education. Teaching positions were scarce in Massachusetts, but frontier towns were desperate for educators. Now, 23 miles from her destination with a broken axle, dwindling water, and no food, Lillian wondered if she would ever see the schoolhouse she'd been promised. The sun beat down relentlessly, and she huddled in the thin strip of shade her wagon provided, conserving what little strength remained in her 22-year-old body. The sound came first hoofbeats, steady and rhythmic. Lillian's heart leapt with both hope and fear. Out here, a stranger could mean salvation or danger. She squinted against the harsh sunlight as a figure appeared on the horizon, the silhouette of a man on horseback gradually taking shape. As he approached, Lillian saw he rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders squared beneath a worn leather vest. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. The rider slowed his chestnut mare as he neared the wagon, eyes scanning the broken wheel before settling on Lillian. His gaze was cautious, but not unkind. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "appears you've found yourself in a spot of trouble." His voice carried a gentle drawl, different from the harsh Boston accents Lillian had known all her life. Despite her predicament, she found herself noticing the way the sun brought out golden flecks in his hazel eyes. "The axle broke yesterday morning," Lillian explained, struggling to her feet. The sudden movement made her head spin, and she reached out to steady herself against the wagon. The man was off his horse in an instant, crossing the distance between them with long strides. His hands were calloused but gentle as he caught her elbow. "Easy there," he said. "When's the last time you ate?" Lillian hesitated, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. 3 days ago, I didn't pack enough provisions for delays." The stranger's expression softened as he reached into his saddlebag. "Name's Yates Walker," he said, pulling out a cloth-wrapped package. "Most folks just call me Yates." "Lillian Parker," she replied, watching as he unwrapped what appeared to be his own meager rations, some jerky, a small tin of beans, and a single biscuit. Without hesitation, Yates broke the biscuit in half, offering the larger portion to Lillian along with some jerky. "It's not much," he said with a smile that transformed his weather-worn face, "but it'll keep you standing until we can get you somewhere proper." Lillian's fingers trembled as she accepted the food. "I can't take your provisions, Mr. Walker." "Just Yates," he corrected, his smile growing warmer. "And you're not taking anything. I'm sharing. There's a difference." The biscuit was dry and hard, but Lillian couldn't remember anything tasting so wonderful. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, conscious of Yates watching her with a mixture of concern and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Val Verde's still a fair piece from here," he said, glancing at the broken wagon. "That axle won't be fixed without proper tools and lumber." "Val Verde is my destination," Lillian said between careful bites. "I've accepted a position as the schoolteacher." Yates raised his eyebrows. "That's so?" "Town's been waiting on a teacher for near 6 months. The children are running wild as jackrabbits." "I was supposed to arrive 3 days ago," Lillian said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "What if they've given the position to someone else?" Yates shook his head. "Not likely. Val Verde isn't exactly overflowing with educated folks looking for work. Ranch life and mining don't leave much time for book learning." He stood, surveying her belongings. "We need to get you to town. I can load your essential items on my horse and you can ride. I'll walk alongside." "I couldn't possibly," Lillian began. "Madam Lillian," Yates interrupted gently. Out here, pride can be as dangerous as a rattlesnake. Sometimes you have to accept help to survive. There was wisdom in his words that went beyond his apparent years. Lillian guessed he wasn't more than 30, yet his eyes held the weathered experience of someone who had seen much of life's hardships. What about my wagon? My things? She asked, looking at the books and teaching supplies she'd so carefully packed. I'll send some men back for what we can't carry, Yates promised. Val Verde might be small, but we look after our own, and as the town's teacher, that includes you now. Lillian felt a curious warmth at his words, at being included in something, belonging somewhere, when just moments ago she'd felt abandoned to die in the desert. She nodded her agreement, and Yates immediately set to work, efficiently sorting through her belongings to determine what was essential for the journey. As he worked, Lillian found herself studying him. His movements were economical and practiced, his hands strong but capable of surprising gentleness when handling her more delicate possessions. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, just the fluid competence of a man accustomed to solving problems. Are you a rancher? She asked as he secured a bundle to his saddle. Yates nodded. Small spread about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Paid for it with 8 years of driving cattle for other men. That's impressive, Lillian said sincerely. Property ownership was something she'd once taken for granted in her father's house before the creditors came. Now she understood the value of having something to call one's own. Just fortunate, Yates replied, though a hint of pride showed in the set of his shoulders. The war left a lot of land unclaimed in these parts. Men who might have worked it never came home. The mention of the war, even 13 years after its end, cast a momentary shadow between them. Lillian wondered which side Yates had fought for, if he'd fought at all. She'd been a child during those years, but the division still ran deep in some places. There, Yates said, stepping back from the horse. That should do it. The rest we'll come back for. He held out his hand. Let me help you up. Lillian placed her hand in his, feeling the strength in his grip as he boosted her onto the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, and she grabbed the saddle horn, unaccustomed to riding astride. Easy, Yates murmured, though whether to her or the horse, Lillian wasn't certain. Maple's gentle as they come. She won't let you fall. Maple? Lillian asked, settling herself more securely. For her color, Yates explained, patting the chestnut mare's neck. Not very imaginative, I know, but names should be honest, at least. I think it suits her perfectly, Lillian said, finding herself smiling despite her exhaustion. Yates gathered the reins and began leading the horse, setting a steady pace that would cover ground without overtaxing either the animal or himself in the heat. It's about 4 hours to town at this pace, he informed her. We should arrive just before sundown. As they traveled, Lillian found herself growing stronger as the food in her stomach provided much-needed energy. The jerky and biscuit had been simple fare, but they represented something profound kindness from a stranger when she'd most needed it. May I ask what brings a Boston lady all the way to Arizona territory? Yates asked after they'd been traveling for a while. Lillian hesitated. In Boston, one's financial difficulties were discussed in hushed tones, if at all. But out here, with the vast sky above and nothing but honesty between them so far, pretense seemed foolish. My father died last winter, she explained. He was a professor at Harvard, but it turns out he had gambling debts I knew nothing about. When the creditors were done, there was nothing left. No house, no savings, no prospects. I'm sorry for your loss, Yates said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. Thank you, Lillian replied. An old colleague of his wrote about the teaching position here. The salary isn't much, but it comes with a small house and the chance to build something new. Starting over, Yates nodded. I understand that better than most. Were you always in Arizona? Lillian asked, curious about the man who'd saved her with a biscuit and a smile. Yates was quiet for a moment before answering. No, madam. I was born in Tennessee. Left after the war, there wasn't much to go back to. Worked my way west, one cattle drive at a time. His answer was straightforward, but provided little detail. Lillian sensed there was more to his story, but didn't press. Everyone out here, it seemed, was running from something or toward something else. As the hours passed, the landscape began to change subtly. The stark desert gave way to scattered scrub brush and the occasional stunted tree. In the distance, Lillian could see the outline of mountains, purple against the sky. "Those are the Chiricahua Mountains," Yates explained, following her gaze. "Apache country, or it was. Most have been moved to reservations now." There was a note in his voice that suggested he didn't entirely approve. "You sound as though you don't agree with that," Lillian observed. Yates adjusted his hat, choosing his words carefully. "I believe a man or woman has a right to their home. The Apaches were here long before any of us. Seems wrong to decide they don't belong on their own land anymore." His answer surprised her. In Boston, she'd heard the frontier tribes described as savages, obstacles to progress. Yates's perspective reflected a respect she hadn't expected. "You think differently than many men," she said. "Maybe," he shrugged. "Or maybe I've just seen enough of men's cruelty to recognize it doesn't belong to any one color or kind." Their conversation continued as they traveled, touching on the town they were approaching, the people she would meet, the challenges of frontier life. With each passing mile, Lillian felt less like a stranger being helped and more like a companion on a journey. The sun was beginning its descent when Yates pointed to a collection of buildings appearing in the distance. "Val Verde," he announced. "Not much to look at, but it's home." From her vantage point on the horse, Lillian could see a main street lined with wooden buildings, some painted, others weathered to a silver gray. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and scattered houses dotted the outskirts. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but represented safety and a new beginning after her harrowing journey. As they approached the town, Lillian became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Her dress was dusty and wrinkled, her hair unkempt. This was hardly the impression she'd hoped to make as the new schoolteacher. Yates seemed to sense her discomfort. "Don't worry about how you look," he said quietly. "Out here, folks judge by actions, not appearances. And surviving what you've been through speaks well of you." His reassurance helped, though Lillian couldn't help feeling self-conscious as they entered the town proper. Several people stopped to watch their approach, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Yates, didn't expect to see you in town today," called a man from the doorway of what appeared to be a general store. "Wasn't planning on it, Harold," Yates replied. "Found Miss Parker here stranded with a broken axle about 20 miles out. She's our new school teacher." Harold's face lit up. "Well, praise the Lord. We'd just about given up hope you were coming, Miss Parker. The town council was meeting tonight to discuss alternatives." "I apologize for my tardiness," Lillian said, struggling to maintain her dignity despite her bedraggled state. The journey proved more challenging than anticipated. "No need for apologies," Harold assured her. "You're here now, and that's what matters. Let me fetch Mayor Simmons. He'll want to welcome you properly." As Harold hurried away, more townsfolk began to gather, drawn by the arrival of the long-awaited teacher. Yates stayed close to Lillian's side, his presence reassuring amidst the growing crowd. A portly man in a well-worn suit pushed through the onlookers, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Parker, I'm Bartholomew Simmons, mayor of Val Verde. We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." "Thank you, Mayor Simmons," Lillian replied, wondering how she could gracefully dismount without making a spectacle of herself. Before she could attempt it, Yates was at her side, offering his hands to help her down. His strong grip steadied her as her feet touched the ground, her legs unsteady after hours in the saddle. "Miss Parker had quite an ordeal," Yates explained to the mayor. "Her wagon broke down, and she's been without proper food for several days." The mayor's expression shifted to concern. "My dear lady, how terrible. We must get you situated immediately. Your quarters are ready at the schoolhouse simple accommodations, but clean and comfortable." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, the doctor's wife. Why don't I take Miss Parker to get settled while you men arrange to retrieve her belongings?" Lillian was grateful for the suggestion, but suddenly felt reluctant to part from Yates. He had been her lifeline, her first connection to this new place. Mr. Walker, she said, turning to him, I don't know how to thank you adequately for your assistance today. Yates's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. No thanks needed. Just doing what anyone would do. Not anyone, Lillian said softly. Not everyone would share their last biscuit with a stranger. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding perhaps, or the recognition of a connection that had formed in the hours of their journey together. I'll make sure your things are brought to you safely, Yates promised, and I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right. Make sure you're settling in. I'd like that, Lillian replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As Sarah Jenkins led her away toward the schoolhouse, Lillian glanced back to see Yates watching her go, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. In that moment, despite her exhaustion and the uncertainty of her new life, Lillian felt a flutter of something unexpected hope, not just for her future in Val Verde, but for the possibility of seeing more of the kind cowboy who had shared his last biscuit, and a smile. The schoolhouse was a modest building at the edge of town, with the teachers' quarters attached at the rear. Sarah Jenkins proved to be a friendly, talkative woman in her 40s who seemed to know everything about everyone in Val Verde. We've been so looking forward to having a proper teacher again, Sarah explained as she showed Lillian around the small living space. Our last one left 8 months ago to get married in Tucson. The children have been running wild ever since, though some of the mothers have tried to keep up with basic lessons. The quarters consisted of a main room that served as both parlor and kitchen, with a small bedroom off to one side. The furniture was simple but sturdy: a bed, a dresser, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the small stone fireplace. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the table and hung fresh curtains at the windows. It's lovely, Lillian said sincerely, touched by the thoughtful preparations. It's not much compared to what you might be used to in Boston, Sarah said, lighting a lamp as dusk settled outside. But we wanted you to feel welcome. It's perfect, Lillian assured her. More than I hoped for. Sarah busied herself heating water on the small stove. You'll want to wash up. I've brought some stew from my own kitchen. You need proper nourishment after your ordeal, and I can lend you a nightgown until your things arrive. You're very kind, Lillian said, the reality of her narrow escape beginning to sink in. I might not have survived if Mr. Walker hadn't found me, Sarah smiled knowingly. Yates is a good man, keeps to himself mostly, but he's always the first to help when someone's in need. Been that way since he arrived here 7 years ago. Lillian found herself curious about the cowboy who had saved her. Has he always been alone? I mean, is he married? Sarah finished for her, eyes twinkling. No, though not for lack of interest from certain ladies in these parts. He's built that ranch of his from nothing, works harder than 2 men, but seems to prefer his own company most days. Lillian nodded, trying not to appear too interested. He mentioned he's from Tennessee originally. That's about all anyone knows, Sarah replied, pouring steaming water into a basin. He doesn't speak much about his past. There was talk when he first arrived, speculation about whether he might be running from the law or some such. But he's proven himself 100 times over since then. Val Verde's lucky to have him. The arrival of several men carrying Lillian's trunks and boxes interrupted their conversation. Mayor Simmons supervised as they arranged her belongings in the small living space. Mr. Walker asked me to tell you he's gone back for the rest of your things in the wagon, the mayor informed her. Said he'd bring everything to town tomorrow. Lillian felt a rush of gratitude. That's very generous of him. That's Yates, one of the men commented. Never does anything halfway. After the men departed and Sarah had ensured Lillian had everything she needed for the night, Lillian found herself alone in her new home. The events of the day caught up with her all at once, and she sank onto the bed, emotions overwhelming her. She had come so close to disaster. If Yates hadn't happened along when he did. Lillian shuddered at the thought. Yet here she was, safe in Val Verde, with a roof over her head, food in her stomach, and the promise of a new beginning. As she drifted off to sleep that night, her last thought was of hazel eyes crinkling at the corners and a kind smile offered along with a shared biscuit. The next morning, Lillian awoke to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town coming to life, roosters crowing, horses nickering, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting warm patterns across her borrowed nightgown. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to her new reality. Today marked the beginning of her life in Val Verde. Today, she would meet the children who would be her pupils, begin organizing her classroom, and start building the future she'd traveled so far to claim. And perhaps, she acknowledged to herself, she would see Yates Walker again. Rising, Lillian washed at the basin, grateful to find that one of her trunks contained clothing. She chose a simple blue dress that had survived the journey with minimal wrinkles and pinned her auburn hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Looking in the small mirror above the dresser, she hardly recognized herself. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been near death, filthy and desperate. Now, color had returned to her cheeks, and her green eyes reflected determination rather than despair. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. Opening it, Lillian found a young girl of about 12 standing on the step, holding a covered basket. "Good morning, Miss Parker," the girl said, offering a shy smile. "Ma sent me with some breakfast for you. I'm Emma Wilson." "That's very thoughtful, Emma," Lillian replied, accepting the basket. "Would you like to come in?" Emma nodded eagerly, stepping into the teacher's quarters with wide-eyed curiosity. "Is it true you came all the way from Boston? Pa says that's clear on the other side of everywhere." Lillian smiled at the description. "Your father's right. It is a very long journey." "And Mr. Walker rescued you when your wagon broke?" Emma continued, settling at the table as Lillian uncovered the basket to find warm biscuits, a jar of preserves, and some hard-boiled eggs. "He did," Lillian confirmed, touched that Yates's kindness was already becoming part of the town's narrative. "He's nice," Emma said with the straightforward assessment of youth. "He taught my brother Caleb how to ride when Pa was laid up with a broken leg last year. Lots of the men here wouldn't bother with someone else's child like that." This additional insight into Yates's character warmed Lillian even more than the fresh biscuit she was eating. "He seems like a very good man," Emma nodded vigorously. "The best." "Oh, Ma also said to tell you that school can start whenever you're ready. All the children are excited to meet you." "Perhaps we could begin the day after tomorrow," Lillian suggested. "That will give me time to organize the classroom and prepare my lessons." "I can help," Emma offered eagerly, "and I can introduce you to everyone. There are 23 children in Val Verde who will be coming to school, from little Timmy Jenkins, who's just 6, to my cousin Martha, who's 16. Lillian was grateful for the girl's enthusiasm. "That would be wonderful, Emma. Thank you." After breakfast, Emma led Lillian to the schoolroom, a large open space with rows of desks facing a teacher's desk on a small raised platform. Bookshelves lined one wall, though they were sparsely filled. A black slate board hung behind the teacher's desk, and large windows provided ample natural light. "It's not fancy," Emma said, watching Lillian's face anxiously. "Not like schools back east, I expect." "It's perfect," Lillian assured her, already envisioning the room filled with eager young minds. "We'll make it our own." They spent the morning cleaning and organizing, with Emma proving to be an enthusiastic helper. By midday, the classroom was taking shape, with Lillian's teaching materials unpacked and arranged. As they worked, various townspeople stopped by to introduce themselves, each bringing some small welcome gift, a pie, a bunch of flowers, a handmade quilt. Lillian was touched by the community's generosity, especially knowing that many of these families had little to spare. It was late afternoon when Lillian heard the distinctive sound of wagon wheels outside. Her heart quickened as she went to the schoolhouse door. Sure enough, there was Yates, driving her repaired wagon with Maple tethered behind. He looked different today, freshly shaven, his dark hair neatly trimmed, wearing a clean shirt under his leather vest. When he saw her in the doorway, his face broke into that now familiar warm smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Miss Parker," he called, setting the brake and jumping down from the wagon seat. Looks like you're settling in. Mr. Walker, Lillian replied, unable to suppress her own smile. I can't believe you managed to repair the wagon so quickly. Yates approached, hat in hand. The axle wasn't as bad as it looked. Nothing Hank at the livery couldn't fix with the right tools. He glanced past her into the schoolhouse. Getting your classroom in order, I see. Emma Wilson has been an enormous help, Lillian said, gesturing to the girl who was watching them with undisguised interest. Emma's one of our brightest, Yates said with a nod to the girl. She'll have you knowing all of Val Verde's business by sundown. Emma giggled. Mr. Walker, are you staying for supper? Mrs. Jenkins is bringing a pot of stew to welcome Miss Parker properly. Yates hesitated, glancing at Lillian. I wouldn't want to intrude on Miss Parker's welcome. It's hardly an intrusion, Lillian said quickly, surprised by how much she wanted him to stay. After all you've done, you should be the guest of honor. Something flickered in Yates's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or surprise at being wanted. Well, when you put it that way, I reckon I could stay a while. Let me unload your things first. For the next hour, Yates transferred Lillian's remaining possessions from the wagon to her quarters, refusing all offers of help with good-natured stubbornness. You ladies focus on setting up the classroom, he insisted. I've carried heavier loads than this. By the time Sarah Jenkins arrived with the promised stew, several other townspeople had gathered at the schoolhouse, turning Lillian's first evening in Val Verde into an impromptu welcome party. Tables were set up in the schoolyard, and someone produced a fiddle, filling the gathering dusk with lively music. Throughout the evening, Lillian found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Yates. He moved easily among the townsfolk, clearly respected if not entirely embraced as one of their inner circle. There was still something separate about him, a quality of watchful quietness even as he participated in conversations and helped serve food. When most of the guests had departed and only a few lingered to help clean up, Yates approached Lillian where she stood at the edge of the schoolyard, gazing up at the vast canopy of stars. Different from Boston, he commented, following her gaze upward. Everything is, Lillian replied. But the stars, I've never seen them so brilliant. No city lights to dim them, Yates said. Out on the ranch, sometimes I lie outside just to watch them. Makes a man feel small, but connected to something larger all at once. Lillian glanced at him, struck by the unexpected poetry in his words. You surprise me, Mr. Walker. Call me Yates, please, he said. After sharing my last biscuit with you, I reckon we're past formalities. The reference to their first meeting brought a smile to Lillian's lips. Yates, then. And I'm Lillian. Lillian, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. It suits you. Elegant, but strong, too. The compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. Thank you for everything you've done. The wagon, my belongings, all of it. Yates shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true, Lillian said quietly. Most men would have taken what they wanted from a stranded woman and left her to her fate. His expression darkened. Those aren't men. They're animals. The vehemence in his voice suggested personal experience with such cruelty, though whether as witness or victim, Lillian couldn't tell. Well, you've proven yourself a true gentleman, she said, lightening her tone, and I'm eternally grateful. Yates was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. I should be heading back to the ranch. Got chores to tend to at first light. Disappointment flickered through Lillian, though she knew his departure was inevitable. Of course. Will you be coming to town again soon? He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if trying to read something in her expression. I generally come in for supplies every couple of weeks, but I could make it sooner. Maybe check how the new schoolteacher is faring with all those wild youngsters. I'd like that, Lillian said, perhaps too quickly. I mean, I would appreciate knowing someone is checking on my progress. A hint of a smile played at the corners of Yates's mouth. Then that's what I'll do. Perhaps Sunday after church? I could show you around the area a bit if you'd like. I'd enjoy that very much, Lillian replied, trying to contain the flutter of anticipation in her chest. Yates nodded, seeming pleased. Sunday, then. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply tipped his hat. Good night, Lillian. Sleep well in your new home. Good night, Yates, she replied softly, watching as he walked to where Maple was tethered, mounted with fluid grace, and rode away into the darkness. Behind her, Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat, reminding Lillian they weren't alone. Well, Sarah said with undisguised interest, it seems our Mr. Walker has taken quite a shine to you. Lillian turned, embarrassed to have forgotten the woman's presence. He's simply being kind to a newcomer. Sarah's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. In the 7 years Yates Walker has lived near Val Verde, I've never known him to offer anyone a Sunday tour, and I've certainly never seen him look at anyone the way he just looked at you. And how is that? Lillian couldn't help asking. Like a man who's just found something he didn't know he was missing, Sarah replied. Mark my words, Miss Parker. That man will be finding reasons to come to town a lot more often now that you're here. As Lillian prepared for bed that night, Sarah's words echoed in her mind. She told herself it was foolish to read too much into Yates's kindness, or to allow her own feelings to develop beyond grateful friendship. She had come to Val Verde for a new start, to establish herself as a teacher and build a respectable life. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep, her mind filled with images of hazel eyes, strong hands, and a smile that seemed to promise something she hadn't known she was seeking. The following days passed in a flurry of activity as Lillian prepared for her first day of teaching. True to her word, Emma Wilson proved an invaluable assistant, helping to organize books, clean slates, and arrange the classroom into a welcoming learning environment. On Friday morning, Lillian stood nervously before her assembled students for the first time. 23 young faces looked back at her with expressions ranging from excitement to skepticism. The youngest, Timmy Jenkins, clutched a slate nearly as big as himself, while the oldest pupils sat with the feigned disinterest of teenagers everywhere. Good morning, Lillian began, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm Miss Parker, and I'm honored to be your teacher. A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. Miss Parker, is it true you almost died in the desert, and Mr. Walker saved you with his last biscuit? The directness of the question caught Lillian off guard, though she shouldn't have been surprised that the story had spread. It's true that Mr. Walker helped me when my wagon broke down, she acknowledged, and I was very hungry, so his sharing his food was indeed a kindness. Pa says Yates Walker doesn't do anything halfway, called a boy from the back. Says if he decided to help you, he'd make sure you were safe all the way to town. Your father is right, Lillian replied. Mr. Walker was very thorough in his assistance. Now, shall we begin our lessons? I'm eager to learn what you've been studying. Despite her attempt to redirect the conversation, the children's fascination with her rescue persisted throughout the day. Lillian found herself both touched and embarrassed by their interest, particularly when it focused on Yates. Miss Wilson says you're going riding with Mr. Walker on Sunday, one of the older girls commented during the lunch break. Mr. Walker offered to show me the area, Lillian corrected, trying to maintain her professional composure. As a newcomer, it's important for me to understand the geography of my new home. The girl exchanged knowing glances with her friends. My sister says he's the best catch in 3 counties, but too wild to be caught. That's quite enough, ladies, Lillian said firmly. Mr. Walker's personal life is not an appropriate topic for discussion. Despite the occasional distractions, Lillian's first day of teaching went remarkably well. The children were eager to learn, if somewhat behind in their studies after months without formal instruction. By the time she dismissed them in the afternoon, Lillian felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why she had come west, to make a difference, to build something meaningful. As the children scattered into the afternoon sunshine, Lillian noticed a figure on horseback at the edge of the schoolyard. Her heart quickened as she recognized Yates, sitting easily in the saddle, watching the proceedings with interest. When the last child had departed, he rode forward, tipping his hat. Afternoon, Miss Parker. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Lillian replied, unable to suppress her smile. What brings you to town today? Had some business with the blacksmith, Yates explained, dismounting. Thought I'd see how your first day of teaching went. The children are wonderful, Lillian said. Curious, eager to learn. I couldn't ask for more. They're lucky to have you, Yates said, his gaze warm as it rested on her face. The whole town is. Lillian felt herself blushing under his regard. You're too kind. Just honest, he replied. Are we still on for Sunday? I thought I'd take you to see the valley north of town. There's a spot there that shows the whole basin best view in the territory, if you ask me. I'm looking forward to it, Lillian assured him. Yates nodded, seeming pleased. I'll come by after church then, around noon. Noon is perfect, Lillian replied. As Yates prepared to mount his horse again, a commotion from the direction of the main street caught their attention. Shouts and the sound of running feet preceded the appearance of several men, one of whom Lillian recognized as the town's young deputy. Yates! The deputy called, breathless from running. Thank God you're here. Stagecoach got held up about 10 miles south. Driver's hurt bad and the passengers are stranded. Sheriff's gathering a posse. Yates's expression changed instantly, all warmth vanishing as he straightened to his full height. How many robbers? 3, according to the messenger. Armed and dangerous. They've still got the passengers holed up in a canyon. Yates turned to Lillian, his face apologetic. I have to go. Of course, she said quickly, though fear clutched at her heart. Please be careful. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. I'll still come Sunday if I can. Before Lillian could respond, he was mounting Maple and riding away with the deputy, leaving her standing alone in the schoolyard, a knot of worry forming in her stomach. The next morning brought no news, and Lillian found herself distracted during Saturday's lessons, her thoughts repeatedly turning to Yates and the danger he might be facing. By the time she dismissed the children for the weekend, anxiety had become a constant companion. Don't you worry about Mr. Walker, Sarah Jenkins assured her when she stopped by with fresh bread that evening. He's the best tracker in these parts, and he's got more common sense than all the other men in that posse combined. I can't help but worry, Lillian admitted. Those men are dangerous. Sarah studied her with sympathetic eyes. You've taken quite a liking to him in a short time. Lillian wanted to deny it, to protect her dignity and reputation, but found she couldn't lie to this kind woman who had become her first friend in Val Verde. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's watching, Sarah said with a gentle smile. And for what it's worth, I think he feels the same. I've never seen Yates Walker make special trips to town just to check on someone before. Lillian sighed, moving to the window to gaze out at the gathering dusk. It's foolish, isn't it? I've known him less than a week. The heart doesn't always operate on schedules, Sarah replied. Sometimes it knows what it wants right away. Even if that's true, Lillian said, I have my position to consider. The school board wouldn't approve of their teacher becoming involved with a man so quickly after arriving. The school board consists of Harold from the general store, Mayor Simmons, and my husband, Sarah informed her with a laugh. And all 3 of them would be delighted to see Yates settled with a good woman. Lillian turned from the window, surprised. You can't be serious. Entirely serious, Sarah confirmed. Yates has done more for this town than most who were born here. He's risked his life multiple times to help others, contributed to every community project, and taught half the young men around here how to be decent human beings by example. If he's found someone who makes him happy, no one in Val Verde would begrudge him that, least of all the school board. The conversation with Sarah provided some comfort, but Lillian's night was still restless, filled with dreams of gunfire and danger. Sunday morning found her in church, praying more fervently than she had in years, not just for Yates's safety, but for clarity in her own confusing emotions. The church service ended without any sign of Yates or the posse. Lillian tried not to let disappointment show as she spoke with her students' parents and made her way back to the schoolhouse. Their planned outing clearly wouldn't happen today. She was just settling in with a book when a knock at the door startled her. Opening it, she found Yates standing there, his face smudged with dirt, his clothes dusty but very much alive and whole. "Yates!" she exclaimed, relief washing over her. "You're back!" "Just rode in," he confirmed, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Didn't want you thinking I'd forgotten our arrangement." "I wouldn't have blamed you," Lillian said, studying him with concern. "You look exhausted. Are you hurt?" "Nothing a bath and some sleep won't fix," Yates assured her. "We caught up to the robbers last night. All three are in custody and the passengers are safe." "Thank God," Lillian breathed. "Please come in. You must be starving." Yates hesitated. "I'm not fit for polite company like this." "Don't be ridiculous," Lillian said firmly, taking his arm and drawing him inside. "Sit down. I'll make you something to eat." Too tired to argue, Yates sank into one of the chairs at her small table while Lillian busied herself preparing food. As she worked, she found herself stealing glances at him, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way he sat with the careful stillness of a man conserving his remaining energy. "Here," she said, placing a plate of bread, cheese, and cold ham before him. "It's not much, but it's what I have." "It's a feast," Yates replied with genuine appreciation. "Thank you." As he ate, Lillian sat across from him, relief and happiness at his safe return, mingling with a deeper emotion she wasn't yet ready to name. "I'm sorry about our ride," Yates said between bites. "I was looking forward to showing you the valley." "There will be other Sundays," Lillian assured him. "Your duty to the town comes first." Yates looked up, his hazel eyes serious despite his exhaustion. "Not always. Sometimes a man has to decide what's truly important to him." The way he said it, the way he looked at her, sent a flutter through Lillian's chest. "And what's important to you, Yates Walker?" He held her gaze steadily. "That's becoming clearer every day, Lillian Parker." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Yates broke it, turning his attention back to his food with a small smile that suggested he knew exactly what effect his words had had. They talked as he finished eating, Lillian telling him about her first days of teaching, Yates sharing carefully edited details of the posse's pursuit. When he'd eaten his fill, he stood reluctantly. "I should go. Got animals to tend to at the ranch." "Of course," Lillian said, rising as well. "You need rest." At the door, Yates paused. "Next Sunday?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than just their postponed ride. "Next Sunday," Lillian confirmed, her heart light with anticipation. As Yates rode away, Lillian knew something fundamental had changed. In just a week, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't have imagined. What began with a shared biscuit and a smile was growing into something that might reshape her entire future if she had the courage to let it. The following Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect for their planned outing. Lillian took special care with her appearance, choosing a riding habit she'd brought from Boston. The dark green fabric complemented her auburn hair, which she arranged in a practical but becoming style beneath a small hat. Yates arrived precisely at noon, looking refreshed after a week's recovery and considerably more polished than Lillian had yet seen him. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean shirt under his vest and new-looking trousers tucked into well-polished boots. "You look lovely," he said when Lillian emerged from the schoolhouse. "Thank you," she replied, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his admiration. "You clean up rather well yourself." Yates grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Don't get used to it. Ranch work's not kind to fancy clothes." He had brought a gentle bay mare for Lillian to ride, equipped with a side saddle that he explained he'd borrowed from a neighbor's wife. "Thought you might be more comfortable riding proper-like," he said, helping her mount. "That was thoughtful of you," Lillian replied, touched by his consideration. As they rode out of town, Lillian was acutely aware of the curious glances and knowing smiles directed their way. Word of their outing had clearly spread throughout Val Verde. "I'm afraid we're causing quite a stir," she commented as they passed the general store, where Harold stood watching them with unconcealed interest. "Small towns," Yates said with a shrug. "Not much happens that isn't noticed and discussed at length." "Does it bother you?" Lillian asked, curious about his feelings on being the subject of gossip. Yates considered the question. Normally, I value my privacy, but in this case, he glanced at her with a hint of a smile. I find I don't mind so much. The implication that he didn't mind being associated with her sent a pleasant shiver through Lillian. Well, that's fortunate, since it seems we're providing the town with its most interesting conversation at the moment. Their ride took them north of Val Verde, following a well-worn trail that wound through scrubland, dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes. As they traveled, Yates pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area where the best water could be found, which plants were useful for medicine, how to read the landscape for signs of weather changes. You know this land intimately, Lillian observed, as if you've lived here all your life. When a place becomes home, you learn it thoroughly, Yates replied, especially out here, where misreading the land can be fatal. They rode for about an hour before Yates led them off the main trail, following a narrower path that climbed steadily upward. The vegetation changed as they gained elevation, becoming greener and more varied. Oak trees appeared, providing welcome shade, and wildflowers dotted the ground in splashes of yellow, purple, and red. It's beautiful, Lillian breathed, taking in the transformation. I had no idea such lushness existed so close to Val Verde. Most folks don't venture this far, Yates said. They stick to the established routes between towns, but the best parts of Arizona are the ones you have to seek out. Eventually, they reached a small plateau that opened to a spectacular view. The entire valley spread before them, with Val Verde visible as a tiny collection of buildings in the distance. Beyond it, the desert stretched to the horizon, while behind them, the mountains rose in rugged majesty. "Oh," Lillian gasped, reining in her horse to fully appreciate the vista. "You weren't exaggerating. This truly is the best view in the territory." Yates dismounted and came to help her down from her horse. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary once her feet touched the ground. "I've never shown anyone this spot before," he admitted, leading her to a flat rock that served as a natural bench. "It's where I come when I need to think, or just to remind myself why I chose this life." The revelation that he was sharing something so personal touched Lillian deeply. "Thank you for bringing me here." They sat side by side, a respectable distance between them, yet Lillian was intensely aware of his presence. The breeze carried his scent, leather, horses, and something uniquely him that she couldn't identify, but found inexplicably comforting. "May I ask you something personal?" Lillian ventured after they had sat in companionable silence for a while. Yates turned to look at her, curiosity in his expression. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough," Lillian acknowledged. "What really brought you to Arizona? There must have been easier places to start over after the war." His face grew thoughtful, and for a moment Lillian feared she had overstepped. But then he sighed, his gaze returning to the distant horizon. "After Appomattox, I tried going home to Tennessee," he began, his voice low. "But everything was changed. My family's farm had been burned. My parents gone. Fever took them while I was away fighting. My brother had died at Shiloh." "I'm so sorry," Lillian said softly. Yates acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "I drifted for a while, working wherever I could find work. But Tennessee held too many ghosts. Every hill, every stream reminded me of what was lost." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Then one night in a Memphis saloon, I got into an altercation with some former Union soldiers. Words were exchanged, then fists. One of them drew a knife." Lillian held her breath, sensing the story approaching its critical moment. "I defended myself," Yates continued, his voice flat. "Too well, as it turned out. The man died of his injuries. It was ruled self-defense, but his friends swore revenge. I decided it was time to go as far west as possible." "And you chose Arizona," Lillian finished for him. "It seemed remote enough," Yates confirmed. "And when I first saw this valley, something about it spoke to me, as if it had been waiting for me to find it." The revelation of his past explained much about Yates, his self-sufficiency, his caution, the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. Yet Lillian found that rather than changing her perception of him, the knowledge only deepened her admiration for the man he had become, despite his hardships. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. Yates studied her face as if searching for judgment or fear. Finding neither, his expression softened. "Not many would hear that story and still look at me the way you're looking at me now." "And how am I looking at you?" Lillian asked. "Like you see me," Yates replied. "Not what happened before, or what others might say about me, but just me." The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Lillian was acutely aware of how easy it would be to close the distance between them, to discover if his lips were as warm as his eyes when he looked at her. Instead, she took a breath and changed the subject slightly. "Have you ever regretted coming here, living so far from civilization?" Yates seemed to understand both her retreat and the genuine curiosity behind her question. "Not once," he answered. "This land asks a lot of a person, but it gives back in equal measure. There's a freedom here I never found back east." "I'm beginning to understand that," Lillian said. "In Boston, my life was constrained by expectations, my father's, society's. Here, I feel as though I can breathe fully for the first time." "It suits you," Yates observed. "This place. You've taken to it quicker than most." "I had good reason to embrace it," Lillian replied, holding his gaze meaningfully. A slow smile spread across Yates's face, warming his eyes. "Glad to hear it." They remained on the plateau for another hour, sharing the simple meal Yates had packed: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a jug of cool water. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they held for the future. With each passing minute, Lillian felt the connection between them deepening, as if they were discovering pieces of themselves in each other. When the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Yates reluctantly suggested they start back. "The trail gets tricky in fading light," he explained, helping Lillian back onto her horse. The return journey was quieter, both of them absorbed in their thoughts. As they approached Val Verde, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Lillian found herself wishing the day hadn't ended so soon. At the schoolhouse, Yates dismounted first, then lifted Lillian down from her saddle with ease. This time, he didn't immediately step back, his hands lingering at her waist as he looked down at her. "Thank you for today," Lillian said, her voice softer than she had intended. "My pleasure," Yates replied. "Truly." Something in his tone, in the way his eyes held hers, made Lillian's heart beat faster. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and she knew with startling clarity that she would welcome it. Instead, he stepped back, his hands falling away from her waist. "May I call on you again? Perhaps Wednesday evening?" "I'd like that," Lillian replied, both disappointed and relieved at his restraint. Yates smiled, tipping his hat. "Until Wednesday, then." As Lillian watched him lead both horses away, she acknowledged the truth she could no longer deny. In just 2 weeks, she had developed feelings for Yates Walker that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. What had begun with a shared biscuit and a smile was blossoming into something much more significant and potentially life-changing. Over the following weeks, Lillian settled fully into her life in Val Verde. Her days were filled with teaching, her evenings often spent preparing lessons or reading. But the brightest points in her week were the times Yates came to town. True to his word, he called on her regularly, sometimes for planned outings, sometimes just appearing at the schoolhouse door with a small gift or an offer to help with some task. Each visit deepened their connection, their conversations growing more personal, their silences more comfortable. The town observed their developing relationship with undisguised interest. Most seemed to approve, though Lillian occasionally caught disapproving glances from a few of the older women who perhaps thought their courtship was progressing too quickly. For that was what it was, though neither had formally acknowledged it a courtship. Yates had yet to do more than hold her hand or place his palm at the small of her back while helping her over rough ground, But the intent behind his attentions was clear to everyone, including Lillian. One evening in late August, about 6 weeks after her arrival in Val Verde, Yates invited Lillian to dine with him at the small hotel that served as the town's only restaurant. It was as close to a formal occasion as existed in the frontier community, and Lillian understood it marked a significant step in their relationship. She wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that she'd saved from her Boston life, and arranged her hair with extra care. When Yates arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze told her the effort had been worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you," Lillian replied, taking in his own formal appearance, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. "You're quite handsome yourself." The hotel dining room was small but clean, with white tablecloths and actual glassware, a luxury in Val Verde. Several other diners nodded greetings as Yates led Lillian to a table by the window. The proprietor himself came to take their order, making recommendations and treating them with special attention. "I feel as though we're on display," Lillian whispered after he departed with their selections. Yates glanced around the room, noting the curious glances directed their way. "We are," he admitted with a wry smile. "First time I've ever brought a lady to dine here. It's caused quite a stir." "First time?" Lillian repeated, unable to hide her pleasure at the distinction. "First time," Yates confirmed, his eyes warm as they held hers across the table. "You're a lot of firsts for me, Lillian Parker." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet sincerity, touched her deeply. "As you are for me," she replied softly. Their meal was excellent by frontier standards, beef stew with actual vegetables, fresh bread, and even apple pie for dessert. Throughout dinner, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared smiles and occasional laughter. As they finished their pie, Yates reached across the table to take Lillian's hand. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, his expression growing serious. Lillian's heart quickened. "Yes?" "The harvest dance is coming up in 2 weeks," Yates continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "Would you do me the honor of attending with me?" Though not what she had half expected or hoped for, the invitation still pleased her immensely. The harvest dance was the biggest social event of the year in Val Verde, and being escorted by Yates would be a public declaration of their relationship. "I'd be delighted," Lillian replied with a warm smile. Relief and happiness spread across Yates's face. "Good. That's good." After dinner, Yates walked Lillian back to the schoolhouse, the night air cool around them, stars brilliant overhead. At her door, he paused, still holding her hand. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Lillian said, reluctant for their time together to end. "It was my pleasure," Yates replied, his voice low and warm in the darkness. He stood close enough that Lillian could feel the heat of his body, smell the clean scent of his shaving soap. His eyes, when they met hers, held a question and a promise. "Lillian," he began, then hesitated. "Yes?" she prompted gently. Instead of speaking, Yates lifted his free hand to her face, his fingers light against her cheek. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down. The first touch of his lips against hers was gentle, almost tentative. Then, as Lillian responded, his kiss deepened, his hand sliding to cup the back of her neck. Lillian's eyes drifted closed, her world narrowing to the sensation of his mouth on hers. Warm and firm and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I found you beside that wagon," he confessed. "I'm glad you finally did," Lillian replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates smiled, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Before I forget, I'm trying to be a gentleman." Lillian nodded, understanding the wisdom of his departure even as she wished he could stay. "Good night, Yates." "Good night, Lillian," he replied, stealing one more quick kiss before stepping back. "Sweet dreams." As Lillian watched him walk away, her lips still tingling from his kiss. She knew with certainty that her dreams would indeed be sweet, and filled with visions of a future she was beginning to believe might be possible. The harvest dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that served multiple community functions. For the occasion, it had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried corn stalks in the corners, pumpkins and gourds on tables around the perimeter, paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling beams. Lillian had spent hours preparing, with Sarah Jenkins's help. Her dress, a warm golden color that complemented her auburn hair, had been slightly altered to match the current fashion as best they could manage in Val Verde. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. When Yates arrived to escort her, his reaction made all the effort worthwhile. He stood in the doorway of her quarters, hat in hand, staring at her with undisguised admiration. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he said simply. Lillian felt herself blushing with pleasure. "And you're the most handsome man," she replied truthfully. He looked particularly striking tonight in a dark suit similar to the one he'd worn for their dinner, his hair neatly combed, his normally sun-bronzed face slightly paler where his hat usually shaded it. As they walked to the town hall together, Lillian was acutely aware of the picture they must present the schoolteacher and the rancher, both dressed in their finest, clearly a couple. The thought brought a smile to her lips and a warmth to her heart. The dance was already underway when they arrived, the hall filled with music from a small band of local musicians. Couples twirled across the wooden floor, while others gathered around the refreshment table or sat talking in small groups along the walls. Their entrance caused a noticeable ripple of interest. Several people called greetings, and Sarah Jenkins hurried over to compliment Lillian's appearance. "You two make a handsome couple," she declared, looking from Lillian to Yates with approval. "Thank you, Sarah," Lillian replied, feeling Yates's hand warm at the small of her back. "Would you care to dance?" Yates asked as the band began a new tune. Lillian nodded, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. As his arm encircled her waist and his other hand clasped hers, she realized this was the closest they had ever been physically, except for their brief kiss. "I should warn you," Yates said with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm not much of a dancer. Cattle don't generally require fancy footwork." "Just follow the music," Lillian advised, smiling up at him. "I'll help guide you." They moved together around the floor, Yates quickly finding the rhythm. His natural grace made up for any lack of formal training, and Lillian found herself thoroughly enjoying the dance. Being held in his arms, even in this proper public setting, felt right in a way she couldn't articulate. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, took turns speaking with friends and neighbors, and enjoyed the simple refreshments provided. Throughout it all, Yates stayed close to Lillian's side, his attention never wavering from her for long. During a brief respite from dancing, as they stood near an open window enjoying the cool night air, Mayor Simmons approached them, his face flushed with exertion and perhaps a bit too much punch. "Miss Parker, Mr. Walker," he greeted them jovially. "Finest couple at the dance, if I may say so." "Thank you, Mayor," Lillian replied politely. "You know," Simmons continued, his tone conspiratorial, "the town council was just saying the other day what a blessing it is that Yates found you out there in the desert. Not just for the school, mind you, though the children are learning splendidly, but for Yates himself." Yates shifted uncomfortably beside her. "I'm not sure what you mean, Bartholomew." The mayor chuckled, oblivious to Yates's discomfort. "Just that you've been alone too long, son. Good to see you with a fine woman on your arm. Makes a man complete, having the right partner." Before either could respond, the mayor was called away by his wife, leaving Lillian and Yates in an awkward silence. "I apologize for that," Yates finally said, his expression unreadable. "Simmons means well, but he's got no sense of propriety." "There's no need to apologize," Lillian assured him. "I'm not offended." Yates studied her face for a moment, then offered his hand. "Would you walk with me? It's getting a bit warm in here." Lillian nodded, allowing him to lead her outside. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. They strolled away from the town hall toward a small garden area that had been planted by the Ladies' Society earlier that year. "I feel I should clarify something," Yates said once they were alone. "Despite what Simmons implied, I didn't seek you out as a potential wife. That day I found you, I was just trying to help someone in need." "I know that," Lillian replied, touched by his concern for her perception of his motives. "Just as I know that what's grown between us since then is something neither of us planned." Yates stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were softened, his eyes dark pools that reflected starlight. "What has grown between us?" he repeated softly. "And what would you call that, Lillian Parker?" Heart pounding, Lillian met his gaze squarely. "I would call it love, Yates Walker. At least, that's what I feel." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, wonder, and then a joy so pure it transformed his face. "Love," he echoed, as if testing the word. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I've been afraid to name it. Afraid that saying it aloud might somehow make it vanish like morning mist. But it's love, sure as sunrise." Lillian felt tears of happiness prickling at her eyes. "I never expected to find you," she whispered. "Never imagined that being stranded in the desert would lead me to the best thing that's ever happened to me." "All because of a broken axle and a shared biscuit," Yates said with a smile, releasing one of her hands to gently brush a curl from her face. "And a smile," Lillian added. "Don't forget the smile. It gave me hope when I needed it most." Yates's expression grew serious again. "Lillian, I know we've only known each other a short time. By city standards, this is all happening too fast. But out here, life doesn't always allow for long courtships and proper timing." "What are you saying?" Lillian asked, though her heart already knew. Instead of answering immediately, Yates leaned down to kiss her, his lips gentle but certain against hers. When he drew back, his eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. "I'm saying that I love you, and I want to build a life with you. I'm asking if you'd do me the honor of becoming my wife." Though she had half expected the proposal, the reality of it still took Lillian's breath away. "Yates," she whispered, her voice catching. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied without hesitation. "I know it's soon. If you need time to consider—" "No," Lillian interrupted, smiling through happy tears. "I don't need time. My answer is yes. Yes, I'll marry you." The joy that blazed across Yates's face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he confessed. "This wasn't exactly planned." "I don't need a ring," Lillian assured him. "Just you." Yates shook his head, smiling. "You're getting a ring, and a proper home, and anything else your heart desires that's in my power to give you." "Just love me," Lillian said simply. "That's all I need." "That," Yates promised, "you'll have forever." Hand in hand, they returned to the dance, their happiness radiating from them so clearly that Sarah Jenkins took one look at their faces and announced loudly, "Well, it's about time." The news of their engagement spread through the hall like wildfire, resulting in congratulations, handshakes, hugs, and more than a few knowing smiles. By the time they left the dance, the entire town was celebrating their upcoming union. Walking Lillian home under a canopy of stars, Yates couldn't seem to stop smiling. "Not exactly a private engagement," he commented wryly. "Privacy is overrated," Lillian replied, squeezing his hand. "I'm happy for everyone to know that I love you." At her door, Yates kissed her once more, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "We can talk about when and how you'd like to be married." "Soon," Lillian replied without hesitation. "I don't want to wait long to be your wife." The look Yates gave her then, full of love and desire and promise, warmed her to her soul. "Soon it is," he agreed. "Very soon." As Lillian prepared for bed that night, her heart too full of joy to sleep, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just 2 months. From near death in the desert to engagement to a man who embodied everything she could want in a partner, strong yet gentle, confident yet humble, protective yet respectful of her independence. The broken wagon axle that had seemed like disaster had instead been the beginning of the greatest blessing of her life, and it had all started with a shared biscuit and a smile. Lillian and Yates were married on a crisp October afternoon, just 3 weeks after the harvest dance. The ceremony was held in the Val Verde church, which had been decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons by the ladies of the town. Lillian wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Sarah Jenkins and several other women had helped her make, adapted from her best Boston gown with new lace at the collar and cuffs. In her hair, she wore a crown of small white flowers that Emma Wilson had gathered from the valley that morning. Yates waited for her at the altar in a new black suit, his face solemn, but his eyes alight with happiness, as she walked toward him on Mayor Simmons's arm, the mayor having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, spoken in clear voices that carried to every corner of the packed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes, including his own. The entire town celebrated with them afterward, sharing a feast that showcased the best of every household's cooking. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, gifts both practical and sentimental. As the celebration continued into the evening, Yates led Lillian away from the crowd toward where a wagon waited, already loaded with her belongings. "Ready to see your new home?" he asked, helping her up onto the seat. "Our home," Lillian corrected with a smile. "Yes, I'm more than ready." The ranch was everything Yates had described, a neat cabin set among oak trees, with a barn, corral, and small garden plot nearby. A stream ran along one edge of the property, and in the distance, the mountains rose against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed as Yates helped her down from the wagon. "It's not grand," he said, watching her face anxiously, "but it's solid, and there's room to expand as needed." Lillian turned to him, reaching up to touch his face. "It's perfect. Everything I could want." Relief and happiness washed across his features. Taking her hand, he led her to the cabin door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Walker." As they crossed the threshold together, Lillian felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before. This was where she was meant to be, with this man, in this place that had seemed so alien just months ago, but now felt like the center of her world. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Lillian nestled against Yates's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" he murmured, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Completely," Lillian replied, lifting her head to look at him in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Yates answered, drawing her closer. "I never expected to find love again after all I'd lost. Thought I'd live out my days alone on this ranch." "And then you found a half-starved woman beside a broken wagon," Lillian said with a smile. "Best day of my life," Yates declared, kissing her forehead. "Though I'd rather you hadn't had to suffer to bring us together." "It was worth it," Lillian assured him. "Every moment of fear and hunger led me to you. I'd go through it all again if that was what it took." Yates's arms tightened around her. "You'll never know hunger or fear again if I have anything to say about it." Lillian believed him. In the months since their first meeting, Yates had proven himself a man of his word, steadfast and true. The life ahead of them might hold challenges. The frontier was never easy, but they would face them together with the strength that came from shared love and mutual respect. "I love you, Yates Walker," Lillian whispered, settling back against his chest. "And I love you, Lillian Walker," he replied, the new name sounding right and natural on his lips. "Now and always." As Lillian drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From Boston society to Arizona territory, from near death to profound love, from stranger to wife, it had been an extraordinary transformation, and all because a kind cowboy had shared his last biscuit and a smile. In the years that followed, Lillian and Yates built a life together that exceeded even their brightest hopes. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, Yates's knowledge of the land and cattle complemented by Lillian's organizational skills and education. Lillian continued teaching at the Val Verde School, riding into town each morning and home again in the afternoon. Her students thrived under her guidance, some eventually going on to higher education in Tucson, or even back east opportunities they might never have pursued without her encouragement. Yates expanded the ranch gradually, adding more cattle each year, improving the cabin with additional rooms, and eventually hiring 2 young men to help with the increasingly successful operation. He became known throughout the territory for his fair dealings in quality livestock, earning respect that extended far beyond Val Verde. Their first child, a son they named James after Yates's father, arrived just over a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Lillian's mother. Both children grew strong and healthy in the clean Arizona air, equally at home on horseback or with a book in hand, inheriting the best qualities of both parents. Through the ups and downs of frontier life, droughts and floods, harsh winters and scorching summers, occasional threats from rustlers or bandits, Lillian and Yates faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with time and shared experience. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Yates surprised Lillian with a special dinner at their expanded home, sending the children to stay overnight with Sarah and Dr. Jenkins in town. 5 years, Lillian marveled as they sat together after their meal, a fine bottle of wine from Tucson opened between them. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you found me beside that wagon. Other times it feels like you've always been part of my life, Yates replied, taking her hand across the table. As if everything before was just preparation for finding you. Lillian smiled, her heart still quickening at his touch, even after years of marriage. Do you remember what you said to me that day, after you gave me part of your biscuit? Yates thought for a moment. I said you weren't taking my food, I was sharing it. There's a difference. Yes, Lillian nodded. That distinction struck me even then. You weren't doing charity, you were connecting, human to human. I think that's when I first began falling in love with you, though I didn't recognize it at the time. For me, it was your courage, Yates admitted, the way you held yourself with dignity despite your circumstances. And then when you smiled at me, he shook his head, still somewhat awed. I was lost from that moment. Rising from his chair, Yates moved to a cabinet and retrieved a small package wrapped in brown paper. I have something for you, he said, returning to place it before her. An anniversary gift. Curious, Lillian unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with her initials inlaid in a darker wood on the lid. Opening it, she gasped at the contents, a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Yates. It's beautiful, she breathed, lifting the necklace carefully. Open it, he urged softly. Inside the locket was a tiny, perfect painting on one side, a miniature replica of the biscuit he had shared with her that first day. On the other, a simple smile. Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes as she recognized the symbolism. Oh, Yates, she whispered, it's perfect. I had it commissioned in Tucson, he explained, moving behind her chair to help her fasten the locket around her neck. Wanted something that would always remind us of our beginning. Lillian touched the locket where it rested against her skin, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. As if I could ever forget, she said, rising to embrace her husband. That moment changed everything. Yates held her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been the first time they'd encircled her. Best decision I ever made, sharing that biscuit with a beautiful stranger. And smiling, Lillian reminded him, looking up into the face she loved more with each passing day. Don't forget the smile." "How could I?" Yates replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners in exactly the way that had first captured her heart. "It brought me you, and everything good in my life." As their lips met in a kiss filled with the depth of 5 years' shared love, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that the broken wagon axle that had seemed like disaster had instead been the beginning of the greatest blessing of her life. From near death to profound love, from stranger to wife, it had been an extraordinary journey, and all because a kind cowboy had shared his last biscuit and a smile. In the years that followed, as their children grew and the ranch prospered, Lillian wore the locket every day, a constant reminder of how the smallest acts of kindness could change lives forever. And whenever new settlers arrived in Val Verde, struggling with the harsh realities of frontier life, the Walkers were always the first to offer assistance, sharing what they had, extending friendship, and always, always offering a smile along with their help. For they knew better than most that sometimes, in life's darkest moments, a simple biscuit shared with a smile could be the beginning of something beautiful beyond imagining.